It started with a cough. Just a small, dry tickle in her throat at first, something she brushed off with warm tea and whispered promises to herself to rest more, to slow down. But the cough grew roots. It bloomed in her chest like a thorn bush, making her lungs burn when she climbed the stairs in the old house she and her sister had inherited. She ignored it for too long, the way people who have no one else often do, afraid to seem weak, afraid to ask for help. Her sister, Marissa, had always been the shining one, the one who talked too loud at family dinners, who laughed with her mouth wide open, who knew how to charm people into paying for things she couldn't afford. But to her credit, Marissa was there the day she collapsed in the hallway. She was the one who called the ambulance, who rode in the back holding her hand while the paramedic checked her pulse. She remembers Marissa whispering, "Don't worry, sis. I'll handle everything. You just get better, okay?" Those words looped in her mind like a soft lullaby when she drifted in and out of sleep in that cold hospital bed. Tubes taped to her skin, machines humming, her heartbeat a fragile rhythm. She'd spent years working 2 jobs, skipping lunches, stashing away every cent in a savings account meant for this exact day, a surgery to fix what the doctors called manageable, if treated in time. Her insurance barely covered the basics. But she wasn't afraid. She had the money. She had Marissa watching it for her. When she was well enough to go home, she thought maybe things would feel different. That her sister would greet her at the door with that same big grin, the promise that everything was under control. Instead, she opened the door to an empty house. No flowers, no welcome home. Just the silence echoing off the cracked plaster walls. At first, she told herself Marissa must be out buying groceries, or picking up her prescriptions. She settled into the creaky old recliner by the window, wrapped in the same worn blanket from her childhood. The house felt colder than she remembered. She fell asleep there, the last daylight slipping away. She woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing on the side table. It was a fraud alert from the bank. Her mind, still foggy from painkillers, took a moment to process the words. Unauthorized transactions. Large withdrawals. Luxury hotel charges. Flights to places she'd only ever seen on postcards, names that looked like they belonged in someone else's life. She rubbed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. It had to be a mistake. She called the bank, her fingers trembling so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She verified her name, her account number, the security questions she'd once joked were unhackable. The woman on the line sounded apologetic, bored in the way customer service can be. Yes, ma'am, the charge is cleared. Looks like your sister Marissa was added as a cosigner last month. She authorized all the withdrawals. I'm afraid we can't reverse them. The room spun. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the raw ache where her stitches pulled when she breathed too deeply. She tried Marissa's phone. Straight to voicemail. She texted. Where are you? I just got home. We need to talk. No answer. It was almost midnight when her phone pinged with a photo. Marissa, tan and smiling on a beach somewhere impossibly blue, her hair spilling around her shoulders like a shampoo commercial. The caption read, treating myself. Hashtag deserved it, hashtag no regrets. She read it again. And again. The words burned into her brain, searing away the last pieces of the girl who always forgave, always gave more than she had. She stared at the ceiling in that cold, empty house. Her hospital fund, every penny she'd saved while her lungs got weaker, while her dreams shrank to the size of an envelope with her name on it, gone. Spent on cocktails, spas, sunsets she'd never see. It hurt more than the stitches, more than the cough, more than the fear of what might happen to her now. It hurt because she'd trusted Marissa with everything. And Marissa had spent it like spare change in a tip jar. She didn't sleep much that night. She sat in the recliner, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, the house too quiet for how loud her thoughts were. Every corner of the living room reminded her of what she'd given up to keep this place standing, the late nights she'd spent paying overdue bills, the second job she'd taken cleaning offices after her day shift so the roof wouldn't leak. She'd always told herself that family meant sacrifice. But this wasn't sacrifice. This was theft dressed up as a vacation. At dawn, she pulled herself up, every bone in her chest aching as she moved. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, pale, stitches peeking from under the collar of her loose sweater, eyes ringed with exhaustion. But there was something steadier there too. A thread of steel she didn't remember putting in, but which had clearly been waiting all along. By mid-morning, she was standing on Marissa's porch, knocking with the same hand that had once braided her sister's hair before school. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. She could hear music playing inside, tinny pop songs that didn't match the luxury she knew Marissa liked to show off. After another knock, the door swung open, and there she was. Marissa looked like the vacation itself, sun-kissed skin, a new silk robe she hadn't owned 2 weeks ago, her phone in her hand with a fresh photo open for her to admire. She didn't even flinch when she saw her sister standing there, bruised and exhausted. "Oh. You're up and about. I figured you'd still be sleeping." She smirked, stepping back just enough to let her inside, but not far enough to feel like an invitation. She stepped over the threshold. The house smelled like expensive candles and fruity cocktails, the kind she'd seen her sister brag about online. She glanced around. New bags on the sofa, tags still hanging off them. Souvenirs from a life paid for with money that was supposed to save her life. "Why?" she asked, her voice low. She didn't trust it not to break. "You knew that money was for my surgery. I almost died in that hospital bed. You said you'd take care of it. Why would you do this?" Marissa's shoulders lifted in a slow, lazy shrug. Don't be so dramatic. You didn't die, did you? Besides, I needed this. You have no idea how hard it's been for me, always stuck here, looking after you, giving up my freedom. I deserved a break." She felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. "You didn't look after me. I looked after both of us. I paid the bills. I kept the lights on. I worked myself sick trying to hold this family together while you—" Marissa scoffed, cutting her off. "Oh, please. Don't start that martyr act. You were never going to spend that money anyway, you'd just hoard it like you always do. Always saving, always planning, never living. You should thank me, at least it went to something fun." The words hit harder than she expected. It was like watching a door swing open on a room she'd never dared to peer into, all the resentment Marissa had kept simmering under her perfect smile. For years, she'd thought her sister's little cruelties were just bad jokes, stress, misunderstandings. Now she saw it for what it was, a blade sharpened over a lifetime. "You stole my life," she said quietly. You do realize that, right? You took my chance to get better." Marissa rolled her eyes, tapping at her phone, already bored. You're so dramatic. Maybe next time, learn to be a little more careful. You shouldn't trust people with that much money if you're just going to lie around in a hospital bed all day. Don't worry, I'll pay it back. Eventually. The way she said eventually made her stomach twist. Because they both knew it was a lie. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across Marissa's phone. For the first time, Marissa looked up, the tiniest flicker of uncertainty flashing behind her perfectly lined eyes. "You will pay it back," she said, her voice firm. Every cent. Marissa's smirk returned, brittle at the edges. Or what? You're going to sue me? You're going to run to your lawyer with your big, scary folder? Grow up. She didn't say anything else. She just turned around and walked back out into the morning air, each breath burning her chest, but feeling sharper all the same. Marissa had always thought she'd be too soft to fight back. But Marissa was about to learn she'd only ever been quiet, not weak. She went home to the old house that evening, moving slow up the porch steps, the creak of the boards under her feet echoing through her bones. She locked the door behind her and stood there for a long moment in the hallway, breathing in the scent she knew by heart, old wood polish, faded curtains, the ghost of her father's pipe tobacco that clung to the walls no matter how many times she scrubbed them clean. It was the house they'd grown up in, a crooked thing, built with love and stubbornness, patched up by their father's rough hands whenever the roof leaked or the floorboards sagged. He'd always said, "This house is our promise. No matter what happens, you girls will always have these walls." She and Marissa used to sit on the floor of the small attic room, drawing plans for what they'd do when they were older. Marissa would talk about moving to the city, buying fancy shoes and flying first class to Paris. She'd always say she'd stay, plant flowers in the front yard, fix the peeling wallpaper, maybe open up the second bedroom to rent out so they'd have extra money. They'd giggle into their hands at the idea that they'd ever argue over something as silly as money. "We're sisters," they'd say, pinky swearing in the glow of a single dusty bulb. "Nothing can break that." But a promise made in the attic when you're 12 doesn't always hold up when you're grown. Their father left them the house equally when he passed, a final gesture of fairness. And in the early days, it made sense. Marissa's job was shaky, so she'd signed her half of the deed over to keep the bank off their backs. She'd promised she'd pay her share later, once things got better. But things never got better for Marissa, not really. She learned how to ask for help just enough to stay afloat. And she learned her sister would always say yes. When the leaks got worse, she took extra shifts. When the furnace died, she pulled money from the small savings she'd tucked away for medical bills. When Marissa said she needed new tires to get to her new big promotion, she handed over her last few $100s, watching the safe margin for her surgery shrink month after month. She blamed herself for a long time, told herself she was just bad with boundaries. She'd spent years saying yes when she meant no, because saying no to Marissa meant listening to her whine, to the dramatic phone calls about how no one ever supported her dreams, how you've always had it easy. Easy. The word stuck in her throat now as she moved around the living room, running her fingers over the framed photos of their parents. Her mother on the porch in a floral dress. Their father, sleeves rolled up, waving to the camera with grease on his cheek from fixing the old truck. Easy was living paycheck to paycheck, hiding overdue bills in the junk drawer so Marissa wouldn't see how thin the margin really was. Easy was saying, "Don't worry, I've got it," while quietly pulling overtime hours on the weekends when her lungs already ached. Easy was keeping this house warm in winter when she knew the roof needed a patch before the next spring storm. Easy was believing Marissa when she said, "I'd never leave you behind." She stood in the tiny kitchen, the chipped linoleum cold under her bare feet, and she saw it all clearly for the first time. Her sister hadn't just stolen her money, she'd stolen her safety, her chance to get better, the one bit of security her father's house was meant to protect. And just like the roof leaks and the sagging floorboards, she'd patched over that betrayal too many times. But not this time. She flipped through the old file folders she kept in a battered tin box under the sink. The deed was still there. Her name. Marissa's name, the faded signature that gave her half the leverage she needed. Her mother used to say, "A house is only as strong as the hands that keep it standing." She pressed her palm against the wall and felt the quiet promise under the layers of paint and cracks. She wasn't going to let Marissa keep chipping away at that promise. Not again. She spent the next few nights at the old kitchen table, the file box spread out in front of her like a puzzle she finally had the patience to solve. The cough still flared in her chest when she moved too quickly, but she was careful now, small steps, shallow breaths, warm tea in her chipped mug to keep her awake while she read every line twice. She dug out the envelope that held the deed. The one Marissa had begged her to sign when their father died, telling her, "It'll be easier for the bank if it's just your name on it. I trust you more than any lawyer. We're blood." She remembered pressing the pen into her sister's hand that day, her thumb smudging the ink, thinking she'd done the right thing. But she also remembered that the bank had insisted on listing both of them on the paperwork when they refinanced the mortgage 5 years ago, a tiny detail Marissa had probably forgotten, because she never read the fine print. She called the bank first. The man on the line sounded young and awkward, the kind of person who didn't ask too many questions so long as the passwords matched and the forms were in order. Yes, ma'am, I see the property is still co-owned. Both parties have legal claim. And yes, if you believe your identity was used to secure a loan or withdraw funds you didn't approve, you can file a fraud alert. She didn't call Marissa. She didn't give her a chance to spin another story or flash that wounded smile that always got her off the hook. Instead, she called the lawyer their father had used for decades, a quiet man named Kapoor, whose office smelled like old books and lemon oil. He'd known her since she was 8, when she'd sat in his reception room kicking her feet and listening to her father talk about keeping the girls protected. She told him everything. The hospital money. The unauthorized withdrawal. The luxury vacation Marissa was still bragging about on social media like it hadn't come straight out of her sister's veins. He listened without interrupting, except for the soft TSK he made when she told him about the forged signature on the account access forms. When she finished, he leaned back in his squeaky leather chair and steepled his fingers under his chin. She left a paper trail a mile wide, he said finally. You've got the deed. You've got the loan papers she piggybacked on your name. And if she used your funds without consent while you were incapacitated, that's fraud. If you want, we can freeze her personal accounts until it's repaid. She blinked at him, surprised by how simple he made it sound. Won't that be messy? He raised his eyebrows. She made it messy. All you're doing is putting the roof back on the house she tried to burn down. By the time she left his office, the sky had turned dark and heavy with rain. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the city lights turning the wet pavement into a blurry quilt of orange and gold. She didn't feel guilt. She didn't feel anger either, not like before. Now there was only the same steady hum she remembered from her father's late nights at the kitchen table, ledger open, pen scratching out debts, counting every dollar until it balanced. She went home and opened her laptop. There was the statement from the bank, the form to freeze assets under suspicion of fraud. There was the email from Kapoor with the draft of the letter he'd courier to Marissa first thing in the morning. The deed was scanned and attached, their names side by side like a final reminder that family is written in ink, but trust is written in pencil. When it was all done, she sat back and looked around the old kitchen. The paint still peeled where the sink dripped. The window stuck when it rained too hard. But it was hers, it always had been, even when she let herself believe it was something they'd share forever. She poured herself another cup of tea and whispered to the empty house, "This is the last time she steals from me." And in that quiet, she could almost feel her father nodding. She waited until the letter was signed, stamped, and legally bound. She waited until the bank confirmed the fraud hold was live, Marissa's accounts frozen tighter than the locked safe under her father's old workbench. She waited until she'd slept through one full night without seeing that vacation photo flash behind her eyelids like a slap. And then she showed up at Marissa's door with the envelope in her bag. Marissa lived on the edge of town in a rented townhouse she could never have afforded on her salary alone. The last time she'd been here, she'd stood in this same doorway with a grocery bag in her hands, chicken soup and fresh fruit when Marissa claimed she had the flu. Marissa had hugged her then, kissed her on the cheek, said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She knew now exactly what Marissa would do, anything she wanted. As long as someone else paid the bill. She knocked once, twice at the firm, the way her father used to knock on her bedroom door when she'd hidden in there too long as a kid. She heard music inside. Then the sound of the door unlocking. Marissa opened it with that same too bright smile, hair done up, nails painted coral pink. For a split second, her eyes darted to the folder under her sister's arm. Then her mouth tightened, just a little. "Well, look who it is," Marissa said, voice dripping honey that would stick to your hands if you touched it. "Did you come to yell at me again? Because I'm not in the mood for another guilt trip." She didn't waste her breath on an argument. She stepped inside, brushing past her sister's surprised shuffle backward. The living room smelled like a new candle, something tropical and expensive. A half-packed suitcase sat on the couch, open like a gaping mouth. She almost laughed. Marissa probably thought she'd run away again, another trip, another place to hide until the mess blew over. She turned and held out the envelope. "Read it." Marissa frowned but didn't move. "What is this? More threats? You know you're making a huge mistake, right? This is going to tear us apart. Family doesn't take family to court." She let out a soft, humorless laugh. You're right. Family doesn't do what you did, either. Family doesn't drain a hospital fund and post selfies from the beach while I'm lying in a hospital bed hoping I don't cough myself to death. Marissa's mouth twitched. She looked down at the envelope like it might bite her if she touched it. When she finally ripped it open, the confidence on her face drained away line by line as her eyes skimmed the words. Bank account. Frozen. Fraud investigation. Lien on the house. Full repayment or forfeiture of her claim to their father's property. And the final line, courtesy of Kapoor, in polite legal phrasing that basically said, "You've run out of ways to lie your way out of this." "You can't do this," Marissa snapped. I'm your sister. This is insane. How am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay my bills? She tilted her head, studying Marissa's panicked face like she was seeing a child who'd just been told the candy store was closed forever. "Figure it out. Just like I did. Or maybe cut back on the spa days." Marissa's voice cracked, that whine she'd used all her life to get what she wanted. You've always been jealous. Admit it. You hate that I know how to enjoy life and you don't. You're just petty. You're punishing me for living a little. She shook her head, almost pitying her. I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching you the word enough. It's one you've never learned. Marissa lunged forward like she might try to snatch the papers out of her hand, but it was too late. The lawyer's letter was already logged, the bank already done with its part. The door behind her felt heavy as she pulled it open, Marissa's furious voice chasing her down the hall like an old ghost that finally lost its teeth. She didn't slam the door when she left. She didn't need to. Some goodbyes don't make a sound when you mean them. She didn't look back as she walked down the street, the spring air sharp in her lungs, the envelope now empty in her pocket like a final stone she'd set down for good. She half expected to feel guilty, for not forgiving, for not staying soft the way Marissa had always counted on. But guilt never came. Instead, there was only a slow warmth spreading through her chest, fragile but real, like the first sunbeam after a long winter. When she got home, the old house felt different. It was still creaky, still drafty in the corners, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like hers again. She stood in the middle of the living room and traced her finger over the nail marks on the doorframe, the ones her father had carved when they were kids to measure how much taller they'd grown. She smiled at the memory of Marissa standing on her tiptoes, always wanting to look bigger than she really was. She brewed herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, the file box tucked neatly beside her elbow. Kapoor's letter lay on top, the house fully back in her name. No co-owner, no shady signatures, no sister hovering in the background waiting to siphon away the next emergency fund. The bank had confirmed Marissa's accounts would stay frozen until every penny of the hospital money was repaid, with interest. If she didn't pay, the state would garnish her paychecks for years to come. For once, Marissa would feel what it was like to have something taken away that she didn't think she'd ever lose. A week later, she made the final payment for the surgery she'd postponed for too long. It wiped out almost everything she had left, but when she mailed that check, her hands didn't shake the way they had before. She knew now she could rebuild what mattered. And this time, no one would get their fingers into her pockets again. She moved her bed into the front room, the sunniest spot in the house. She planted daisies under the kitchen window, the same kind her mother had loved. She painted over the old water stain on the ceiling by herself, humming an old lullaby her father used to sing when the nights felt too big for a little girl with a cough. When the hospital called to schedule her surgery, her sister tried to text her one short, bitter line, "You really hate me, don't you?" She stared at the blinking bubble on her screen for a long time. Then she deleted it without answering. It wasn't hate. It was enough. The day before she went under the knife, she sat by the window with her cup of tea, the spring breeze carrying in the scent of fresh paint and new daisies. She looked around at the house, the patched-up wallpaper, the floor that still squeaked, the nail marks on the doorframe that reminded her she'd always been here, standing her ground. She thought of her father's voice, the ledger on the table, the whisper in the back of her mind, "Keep it safe. Keep it yours." When she came home from the hospital this time, there was no one waiting to drain her dry while she slept. No one whispering "trust me" as they flipped through her savings behind her back. It was just her, the warm blankets, and the sun pouring through the clean window onto the fresh coat of paint. For the first time in years, she felt the kind of quiet that doesn't weigh you down. The kind that says, "This is yours. And you are enough." She knew the road ahead would still be rough, the medical bills would come, the cough would take time to heal, the trust she'd lost in people like Marissa might never come back at all. But she'd learned something bigger than forgiveness. She'd learned how to protect her yes. How to lock the doors when people come knocking with open hands and empty hearts. How to stand her ground when the people who claim to love you think your kindness is their free bank account. She ran her fingers over the windowsill where the daisies peeked up, sturdy and stubborn, growing where they were planted. She sipped her tea, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the word settle into her bones like a promise. Freedom.